The cold seeped through Winifred Harper's threadbare shawl as she burrowed deeper into the haystack, her trembling fingers gently cradling the small swell of her belly. 6 months with child, abandoned in a strange town, and now the first frost of October 1876 threatened to steal what little warmth remained in her bones. In the 3 days since the stagecoach had left her in Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, Winifred had exhausted her meager coins on 2 nights at the cheapest boarding house in town. When the landlady discovered her condition without a wedding band to justify it, she'd been promptly evicted. With nowhere else to turn, the abandoned barn on the outskirts of town had become her reluctant sanctuary. "Just us now, little one," she whispered, patting her stomach as she shifted uncomfortably. The sweet-smelling hay prickled through her dress, but it was better than the cold ground. She had managed to hide here undetected for 1 night already. Perhaps tomorrow she could find work some kind soul who wouldn't turn away a woman in her condition. Winifred closed her eyes, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger. Her last meal had been a dry biscuit from her pocket that morning. The child within her gave a small kick, as if protesting the meager sustenance. "I know," she murmured. "I'll do better tomorrow." She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, lantern light cut through the darkness and a deep voice called out, "Who's there?" Fear shot through her. Winifred tried to burrow deeper into the hay, praying whoever owned this barn would simply move on. But the footsteps grew closer, the lantern light brighter. "I said, who's there? Show yourself before I—" The voice stopped abruptly as the lantern illuminated her hiding place. Winifred raised a hand to shield her eyes from the sudden brightness, taking in the tall silhouette of a man. His broad shoulders were outlined by the glow, a cowboy hat casting shadows across his face. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I meant no harm. I just needed a place for the night. I'll be gone by morning." The lantern lowered slightly, and she could see him better now, a man perhaps 30 years of age, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, and beneath the brim of his hat, she caught the glint of eyes studying her with a mixture of surprise and concern. "You're sleeping in my haystack." His voice held more confusion than anger. "I'm sorry," Winifred said, struggling to sit up, awkwardly trying to conceal her condition. "I didn't think anyone used this barn." The man's gaze dropped to her midsection, then back to her face. His expression softened immediately. "How long have you been out here, madam?" "Just tonight," she answered, though her chattering teeth betrayed how cold she'd become. Without another word, the man set down his lantern and removed his coat. Winifred flinched as he stepped forward, but he merely draped the warm garment over her shoulders. "You can't stay out here," he said firmly. "Not in your condition." Before she could protest, he had bent down and carefully lifted her into his arms, one behind her back and the other beneath her knees. The sudden movement startled her, and she instinctively clutched at his shirt. I can walk," she stammered, embarrassed by her predicament. "No doubt you can, madam, but you won't," he replied, his voice gentler than she expected. "My house is just across the yard. Name's Isaiah Burke, and you are—" "Winifred Harper," she answered reluctantly, realizing how completely at the mercy of this stranger she now was. He carried her with surprising ease, his stride steady as he pushed open the barn door with his boot and stepped into the cold night air. In the moonlight, Winifred could see a modest cabin about 50 yards away, smoke curling from its chimney. "I can't impose," she protested weakly. Isaiah looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Miss Harper, I don't make a habit of leaving women expecting women to freeze in my barn. Now you can come inside where it's warm, have something to eat, and we can sort out what happens next." Too tired and cold to argue further, Winifred let her head rest against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart as he carried her toward the welcoming glow of the cabin windows. Isaiah kicked the door open gently, carrying Winifred inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped her immediately, bringing a rush of tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his actions seemed. "Here we are," he said, carefully setting her down in a wooden rocking chair near the stone fireplace. Winifred took in her surroundings. The cabin was simple but neat, one large room with a kitchen area to one side, a small table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and various tools of ranch life hanging on the walls. "Thank you," she managed, drawing his coat tighter around her shoulders. Isaiah nodded and moved to the stove where a pot simmered. "I've got stew, not fancy, but it's hot." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted, already ladling the steaming stew into a bowl. "That child you're carrying needs nourishment, even if your pride doesn't." Heat flushed Winifred's cheeks. She wasn't accustomed to such direct talk about her condition. Since discovering she was with child, she'd become used to whispers, sidelong glances, and cold rejection, not this matter-of-fact concern. Isaiah placed the bowl in her hands and handed her a spoon. "Eat while it's hot." The rich aroma of the beef stew made her stomach growl audibly. Embarrassed but unable to resist, Winifred took a spoonful. The warm broth and tender meat nearly brought her to tears again, but she maintained her composure. As she ate, Isaiah pulled the second chair across from her and sat down, studying her openly. "Silver Creek's not big enough that I wouldn't know if you had family here," he said. "Where are you from?" Winifred swallowed a bite of stew. "Boston, originally." His eyebrows rose. "That's a long way from Wyoming Territory." "Yes." She took another spoonful, hoping he wouldn't press for more, but Isaiah Burke was clearly not a man easily deterred. "And the father of your child," Winifred's spoon clattered against the bowl. "That's not, I don't think. I'm not asking to judge you," he said quickly. "But if there's someone who should be taking care of you, maybe I can help locate him." A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "He made his position quite clear when he discovered my condition. Thomas Harrington has no interest in acknowledging his indiscretion with a governess." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but exhaustion and the sudden kindness had loosened her tongue. Isaiah's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features. "I see." "You needn't concern yourself," Winifred said, finishing the last of the stew. "I'll be gone in the morning. I just needed one night out of the cold." "And where will you go?" The question hung in the air. Winifred had no answer. Her plan had been to reach her cousin in Sacramento, but the last of her money had gotten her only as far as Silver Creek. The letter she'd sent ahead had received no reply, and now she was stranded. "I'll find work," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I'm educated. I can teach, or perhaps find a position as a shopkeeper's assistant." Isaiah rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "Silver Creek's a small town, Miss Harper, and folks here can be traditional in their thinking." "You mean they won't hire an unmarried woman who's with child?" she translated flatly. He didn't deny it. "What skills do you have?" "I was a governess for 5 years. I can read and write, do sums, play piano adequately, and speak passable French." She lifted her chin. "I can also cook, though not as well as you, apparently." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well, that's something." He took her empty bowl and set it aside, then poured her a cup of coffee. "Here's what I propose," he said, sitting down again. "It's too late to figure anything out tonight. You'll take my bed, I'll sleep in the chair here, and tomorrow we can see about finding you a proper situation." Winifred stared at him in shock. "I couldn't possibly take your bed." "You can and you will," he repeated his earlier words. I've slept in worse places than my own fireside." She wanted to refuse, to maintain what little dignity she had left, but the thought of a real bed after days of discomfort was too tempting. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You don't know me." Isaiah looked at her for a long moment before answering. "My mother was left in a situation not unlike yours when my father was killed in a mining accident. She was carrying my sister at the time. If not for the kindness of strangers, I'm not sure we would have survived." He shrugged. "Besides, what kind of man would I be if I left you in that barn?" Winifred felt the first genuine smile in months touch her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Burke." "Isaiah," he corrected. "If you're sleeping in my house, you might as well use my given name." "Isaiah," she repeated, the name feeling strange yet comforting on her tongue. "Then you must call me Winifred." He nodded, then stood and moved to a chest at the foot of the bed. "I'm afraid I don't have any women's night clothes, but here's a clean shirt that should serve." He handed her a soft flannel shirt, then pointed to a screen in the corner. "You can change behind there. There's a wash basin with clean water as well." Winifred accepted the shirt and slowly made her way to the screen, her legs stiff from hours in the cold haystack. Behind the privacy of the screen, she quickly washed her face and hands, then changed into Isaiah's shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. Her own dress was dusty and wrinkled, but she folded it carefully nonetheless. When she emerged, Isaiah had turned down the bed and was banking the fire for the night. "I'll be right here if you need anything," he said, gesturing to the rocking chair where he'd already placed a blanket and pillow. Winifred hesitated at the edge of the bed. "This is very kind of you." "It's nothing," he replied. "Get some rest." She slipped under the covers, the unexpected softness of the mattress a luxury after recent days. Isaiah's scent a mixture of pine leather, and something uniquely him surrounded her. It was oddly comforting. As she drifted toward sleep, Winifred wondered about the strange twist of fate that had led her to this cabin, to this man. Trust didn't come easily to her anymore, not after Thomas's betrayal, but something about Isaiah Burke's straightforward kindness eased her wariness. "Good night, Isaiah," she murmured. "Good night, Winifred," came his reply from the fireside. "Sleep well." Morning light filtered through the cabin's small windows when Winifred opened her eyes. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up quickly, looking toward the fireplace. Isaiah wasn't in the rocking chair. Instead, he stood at the stove, his back to her as he tended to something that smelled wonderfully like bacon. He changed into a fresh shirt and trousers, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, offering a small smile. "Good morning. Hope I didn't wake you." "Not at all." Winifred smoothed her tangled hair self-consciously, aware of how disheveled she must look. "What time is it?" "Just past 7, he replied, returning his attention to the stove. "Breakfast is nearly ready. There's fresh water in the basin if you'd like to wash up." Winifred slipped from the bed, grateful that the long shirt covered her adequately. She ducked behind the screen and quickly washed her face and hands before changing back into her dress. When she emerged, Isaiah was setting 2 plates on the small table. "I hope you like eggs and bacon," he said, "and I've got some biscuits warming." "It sounds wonderful." She joined him at the table, her stomach already rumbling at the sight of the food. "Thank you." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Winifred couldn't remember the last time she'd had such a hearty breakfast. In Boston, her meals as a governess had been adequate but plain. On the journey west, she'd subsisted mostly on dried goods and whatever inexpensive fare she could find at stagecoach stops. "I've been thinking," Isaiah said finally, setting down his coffee cup. "About your situation." Winifred tensed. I assure you, I won't impose on your kindness any longer than today. If you could just direct me to someone who might be hiring, that's just it," he interrupted. "I've lived in Silver Creek for 5 years now. I know most folks in town, and while they're good people for the most part there." He hesitated. "Unlikely to hire someone in my condition," she finished for him. He nodded. "The thing is, I could use some help around here." Winifred looked at him in surprise. "Here at your ranch?" "It's not much of a ranch yet," he admitted. "I've got 40 acres, a dozen cattle, 2 horses, and some chickens, but I'm expanding. Just built a new corral last month, and I'm adding rooms to the cabin come spring." "And you need help with the chickens?" Winifred asked, confused. A small smile touched his lips. "With the house, mostly. I'm gone from sunrise to sunset most days, working the land or with the cattle. The place could use a woman's touch. Plus, I'm a terrible cook, as you've probably guessed." Winifred glanced at her empty plate. "On the contrary, breakfast was excellent." "That's about the extent of my talents in the kitchen," he admitted. "What I'm proposing is that you stay on, at least until your child is born. You'd have a roof over your head, regular meals, and I'd pay you a fair wage." She stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You want to hire me as your housekeeper, if that's what you want to call it," he shrugged. "I need the help and you need a place to stay. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Suspicion crept into Winifred's thoughts. She'd learned the hard way that men rarely offered something for nothing. "And that's all you'd expect of me? Housekeeping?" Isaiah's eyes widened as her meaning registered, then darkened with a flash of genuine offense. "Miss Harper, I am offering you employment, nothing more. I'm not the kind of man who would take advantage of a woman in your position." Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply. It's just that I've learned to be cautious." His expression softened. "No apology needed. You're right to be careful." He stood and carried their plates to the wash basin. "Take some time to think it over. I need to check on the cattle, but I'll be back around midday." Winifred watched as he pulled on his coat and hat. At the door, he turned back to her. "The offer stands whether you accept the job or not. You're welcome to stay here until you're back on your feet. I can sleep in the barn if having me in the cabin makes you uncomfortable." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Winifred alone in the suddenly quiet cabin. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the baby shift within her. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Do we trust him?" The child gave a small kick in response. Winifred rose from the table and began to clear away the breakfast things. As she washed the dishes, she considered her options. She had no money, no contacts in town, and little hope of finding other employment before her child was born. Isaiah's offer, if genuine, was likely her best chance at survival, and something about the tall cowboy with the kind eyes made her want to trust him, despite her recent experiences with men's duplicity. By the time she had finished washing the dishes and sweeping the floor tasks, she undertook without conscious decision. Winifred had made up her mind. She would accept Isaiah's offer, at least temporarily. She could always leave if things didn't work out. With that decided, she looked around the cabin with new eyes, taking in the details she'd missed the night before. The place was clean but Spartan, clearly the home of a man who lived alone and spent little time on domestic comforts. A few books sat on a crude shelf. She noted a Bible, a worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans, and several agricultural manuals. A small photograph in a wooden frame caught her attention. She picked it up carefully, studying the image of a woman with a serious expression, a small boy at her side and a baby in her arms. Isaiah's family, she guessed the mother he'd mentioned, himself as a child and the sister born after his father's death. Winifred set the photograph down gently, feeling like an intruder in his private memories. She continued her exploration, finding the cabin surprisingly well built despite its simplicity. The stone fireplace was expertly crafted, the wooden floors solid and even. In the corner farthest from the bed, several tools and pieces of lumber suggested Isaiah had indeed been planning to expand the cabin. Winifred tried to imagine what it might look like with additional rooms, perhaps a separate bedroom, maybe even a nursery. The thought startled her. She was getting ahead of herself, imagining a permanence that wasn't part of the arrangement. This was temporary, she reminded herself. A safe harbor until she could figure out her next steps. Outside, she heard the whinny of a horse. Looking through the window, she saw Isaiah returning, earlier than he'd indicated. He dismounted gracefully, patted the horse's neck, and led it to the small stable attached to the barn. Winifred smoothed her dress and hair, suddenly nervous about giving him her decision. What if he'd changed his mind? What if he'd only offered out of pity and now regretted it in the light of day? The door opened, and Isaiah stepped inside, removing his hat. His eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of the tidied cabin. "You've been busy," he observed. "It seemed the least I could do," she replied. "You're back early. Weather's turning. Storm coming in from the north." He hung his hat on a peg by the door. Wanted to get the animals settled before it hits. An awkward silence fell between them. Winifred clasped her hands in front of her, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about your offer," she began. Isaiah waited, his expression unreadable. "I'd like to accept if it's still open, at least until after the baby comes." She lifted her chin. "I'm a hard worker, and I promise you won't regret it." The tension in his shoulders eased, and a small smile touched his lips. "Glad to hear it. And I have no doubts about your work ethic. The cabin hasn't looked this tidy since Mrs. Peterson came to visit last Christmas." Winifred returned his smile, relief washing over her. "Then it's settled," he agreed, extending his hand. "Welcome to Burke Ranch, Miss Harper." She took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. His grip was firm but gentle, his skin warm against hers. "Thank you, Mr. Burke." "Isaiah," he reminded her. "Isaiah," she echoed, feeling the strange intimacy of using his given name. "And you must continue to call me Winifred." He nodded, releasing her hand. "Now about practical matters." "I'll move my things to the barn today, and that won't be necessary," Winifred interrupted. "I can't put you out of your own home." "It's hardly proper for us to share the cabin," he pointed out. "No," she agreed, "but there are ways to address that. Perhaps a curtain across the room for now, until you can build the addition you mentioned." She gestured to the lumber in the corner. "I assume that's what those materials are for." Isaiah looked surprised. "Yes, though I hadn't planned to start until spring." "With respect, we don't have until spring," Winifred said, placing a hand on her growing belly. "But I'm happy to help however I can with the construction." He shook his head firmly. "No heavy work for you, but you're right that we should start sooner rather than later." He glanced at the window where fat snowflakes had begun to fall. "Not today, though. That storm's moving in faster than I thought." "Then today we can plan," Winifred suggested. "I may not be able to lift lumber, but I know a thing or two about designing living spaces." Isaiah's smile widened. "Is that so?" "It is," she replied with more confidence than she'd felt in months. "Now, do you have paper and a pencil? We should sketch out what we're thinking." For the first time since she'd met him, Isaiah Burke laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the cabin. "Yes, madam, I believe I do." As the snow began to fall more heavily outside, they sat at the small table, heads bent together over rough sketches of what the expanded cabin might become. And for the first time since discovering she was with child, Winifred Harper felt something like hope. The snowstorm that had begun that morning continued through the afternoon and into the evening, transforming the landscape around the cabin into a white wilderness. Isaiah had gone out twice to check on the animals, returning with cheeks reddened by the cold and snow dusting his shoulders. "It's really coming down," he reported as he stamped his boots by the door. "Might be snowed in for a day or two." Winifred looked up from the stew she was preparing. In just one day, she had taken over the cooking duties, grateful to have something productive to do. "Is that common for this time of year? October storms happen, but this one's heavier than usual." He hung his coat by the fire to dry. "Good thing we got you out of that haystack when we did." The thought sent a shiver through her. If Isaiah hadn't found her last night. She pushed the dark possibility away and focused on stirring the stew. "Dinner's nearly ready," she said. "I hope you don't mind that I used some of the preserved vegetables I found in the root cellar." "Mind. I'm just glad someone knows what to do with them." He pulled off his boots and set them by the fire. "Mrs. Peterson from town brings me preserves every fall, but half the time I forget they're there." "Mrs. Peterson seems to figure prominently in your housekeeping," Winifred observed with a small smile. Isaiah chuckled. "She's taken it upon herself to make sure I don't live like a complete savage. Her husband runs the general store in town, and they've been kind to me since I arrived." "They sound like good people." "They are." He paused. "They might be a bit surprised by our arrangement, though." Winifred tensed. "Do you think they'll disapprove?" "Honestly, probably at first." He ran a hand through his hair. "But they're fair-minded. Once they understand the situation, you don't need to explain anything on my account," Winifred interrupted. "I'm used to people's judgment." Isaiah studied her for a moment. "You shouldn't have to be." The simple statement, delivered with such genuine conviction, caught Winifred off guard. She turned back to the stew, blinking rapidly to dispel the sudden moisture in her eyes. "Well," she said when she trusted her voice again, "they needn't know right away, need they? I'd like to establish myself a bit first." "Fair enough," Isaiah agreed. Though in a town the size of Silver Creek, news travels fast. Winifred ladled the stew into bowls and they sat down to eat. The heavy snow muffled the world outside, creating a strange intimacy in the cabin. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "This is delicious," Isaiah said after his first bite. "Best meal I've had in this cabin, that's for certain." "Thank you." Winifred felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's nothing fancy, but my mother always said a good stew could warm both body and soul." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was." Winifred's smile turned sad. "She passed 5 years ago. My father followed a year later." "I'm sorry," Isaiah said softly. "My mother's gone 8 years now. My sister Bethany lives in Denver with her husband. They have 2 little ones." "You're an uncle, then?" His face brightened. "I am. Don't get to see them as often as I'd like, but Bethany writes regularly." "Does she know about your ranch?" "She does. Keeps telling me I need to find a wife." He glanced up at Winifred, then quickly away. "Says no man should live alone out here." An awkward silence fell between them. Winifred focused on her stew, unsure how to respond. "What about you?" Isaiah asked after a moment. "Besides your cousin in Sacramento, do you have other family?" Winifred shook her head. "No close family. My parents were both only children and I was their only child. There are distant relatives in Boston, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to explain how they had turned their backs when her pregnancy became known. Isaiah seemed to understand what she didn't say. "Family isn't always blood," he offered. "Sometimes it's the people who stand by you when you need them most." The simple wisdom of his words touched something deep in Winifred. She'd been so alone since Thomas had abandoned her, carrying not just the child but also the weight of shame and rejection. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I'm beginning to see that." After dinner, Isaiah insisted on washing the dishes while Winifred rested in the rocking chair. The baby was active tonight, kicking and shifting. She placed a hand on her belly, a small smile playing on her lips as she felt the movements. "Lively one you've got there," Isaiah observed as he dried the last plate. Winifred looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "My sister was the same way when she was expecting. Said her firstborn danced a jig every evening after supper." He hung the dish towel and came to sit in the chair opposite her. "May I ask when you're due?" "January, according to the doctor I saw in Boston before I left." She shifted in the chair, trying to find a comfortable position. "Though sometimes I wonder if he miscalculated." "The baby seems quite developed already." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "We should make sure you see Doc Miller in town before too long. He's a good man, keeps things confidential." "That would be reassuring," Winifred admitted. It had been months since she'd had any medical attention, and though the pregnancy had progressed normally so far, she couldn't help but worry. "I'll take you in as soon as the road's clear," Isaiah promised. "Now about sleeping arrangements, I was thinking," Winifred interjected. "We could hang a quilt or blanket across the middle of the room. You keep your bed, and I can make up a pallet on this side near the fire." "Absolutely not," Isaiah said firmly. "You're not sleeping on the floor in your condition. I told you, I'm fine in the barn or even here by the fire." "It seems wrong to take your bed," she protested. "What seems wrong is a pregnant woman sleeping on hard floorboards while a perfectly good bed sits empty." His tone brooked no argument. "At least until we can build that addition we planned today," Winifred sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw. "Very well. But only until the addition is built. Then we will revisit this arrangement." "Fair enough." He stood and moved to a trunk near the foot of the bed. "I've got an extra quilt we can hang for privacy. Will that make you more comfortable?" "Yes, thank you." She watched as he rummaged through the trunk, pulling out a faded but clean quilt. "You're very considerate, Isaiah." He glanced back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It's nothing special, just common decency." "Nevertheless," she insisted, "not everyone would show such kindness to a stranger." Isaiah busied himself with hanging the quilt from a beam that ran across the ceiling, creating a makeshift wall that divided the cabin in two. "There," he said when it was secure. "You've got the bed and washstand on that side. I'll keep to this side by the fire and stove." The arrangement transformed the single room into two distinct spaces, offering Winifred a privacy she hadn't expected to find. She rose from the rocking chair, wincing slightly as her back protested. "Are you all right?" Isaiah asked, noticing her discomfort. "Just the usual aches," she assured him. "Nothing to worry about." He didn't look convinced but nodded. "I'll turn in then. Long day tomorrow if this snow lets up." "Good night, Isaiah," Winifred said, moving toward her side of the quilt. "Good night, Winifred," he replied softly. "Sleep well." On her side of the divided cabin, Winifred changed into the flannel shirt Isaiah had given her the night before. As she slipped under the warm blankets of his bed, she realized with a start that for the first time in months, she felt safe. The snow continued to fall throughout the night and into the next day, confining them to the cabin. Isaiah spent the morning sketching more detailed plans for the addition, while Winifred organized the kitchen area, discovering supplies she hadn't noticed the day before. "You have quite a well-stocked pantry for a bachelor," she commented as she inventoried the shelves. Isaiah looked up from his drawing. "Most of that's from trading with neighbors. I help the Hansons with their hay cutting, they share their preserves. The Millers give me flour and coffee in exchange for beef." "It sounds like a good system," Winifred observed. "It's how things work out here," he explained. "People look out for each other. Have to with winters like this." By afternoon, the snow had stopped, though drifts piled high against the cabin. Isaiah ventured out to check on the animals and clear a path to the barn, returning with red cheeks and snow clinging to his beard. "I think we can start on that addition sooner than spring," he announced as he warmed his hands by the fire. "If we get a few clear days, I can at least get the foundation laid and the frame up before the next storm." "Is that wise?" Winifred asked. "Building in winter, it's not ideal," he admitted, "but I've done it before. The important thing is getting walls and a roof up. We can finish the details later." Winifred felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect of having her own space. "What can I do to help?" "For now, just keep doing what you're doing," Isaiah said with a smile. "Having hot meals and a clean house makes the work go twice as fast." The next day dawned clear and cold. After breakfast, Isaiah bundled up and headed out to begin clearing the building site, measuring and marking where the addition would connect to the existing cabin. Winifred watched from the window as he worked, impressed by his methodical approach. He clearly knew what he was doing, measuring twice before making any cuts in the lumber, testing the ground before deciding where to place support posts. At midday, she called him in for a hot lunch of bean soup and cornbread. His appreciation for her cooking was evident in the way he devoured 2 bowls of soup and several pieces of cornbread. "This is becoming a habit," he commented as he wiped his bowl clean with the last bit of bread. "What is?" Winifred asked. "You spoiling me with good food." He grinned. "I might never go back to my own cooking." She laughed, a sound that surprised her. How long had it been since she'd laughed genuinely? "Well, cooking for someone who appreciates it makes it worthwhile." Isaiah's expression turned more serious. "I hope you know how much I value what you're doing here, Winifred. It's not just the cooking or cleaning. It's having someone to share the days with." The honesty in his voice touched her. "I'm the one who should be grateful. You've given me shelter when I had nowhere else to go." "It works both ways then," he said simply. After lunch, Isaiah returned to his work outside while Winifred began preparations for dinner. Through the window, she could see him digging post holes in the frozen ground, a task that looked back-breaking. Yet he worked steadily, stopping occasionally to consult the sketch they'd drawn together. By late afternoon, he had set 4 sturdy posts into the ground, marking the corners of what would become a small bedroom. Winifred marveled at how much he'd accomplished in a single day. When he finally came inside as darkness fell, he was exhausted but satisfied. "Got the foundation posts in," he reported as he removed his snow-covered boots. "Tomorrow I'll start on the floor joists." "You've made remarkable progress," Winifred said, handing him a cup of hot coffee. "But you must be tired." "Nothing a good meal and night's rest won't fix," he assured her, though she noticed how stiffly he moved after dinner as Isaiah sat by the fire reviewing his plans for the next day's work. Winifred noticed him rubbing his shoulder with a grimace. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Just sore," he admitted. "Digging post holes in frozen ground isn't exactly easy work." Without thinking, Winifred moved behind his chair. "May I?" she asked, placing her hands lightly on his shoulders. Isaiah stiffened in surprise, then nodded. Winifred began to knead the tight muscles of his shoulders and upper back, feeling the knots of tension beneath her fingers. "My father used to get terrible muscle cramps from working in his shop," she explained as she worked. "Mother taught me how to help ease them." Isaiah's initial tension gradually melted away under her ministrations. "Your mother taught you well," he murmured. Winifred continued the massage, careful to keep her touch professional despite the strange intimacy of the moment. His shoulders were broad and solid beneath her hands, the muscles well developed from years of physical labor. "There," she said finally, stepping back. "That should help a bit." Isaiah rolled his shoulders experimentally. "It does, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Winifred retreated to her side of the quilt partition, suddenly aware of the impropriety of what she'd done. Despite their arrangement, they were still a man and woman alone in a remote cabin. Boundaries needed to be maintained. "Good night, Isaiah," she called softly from her side. "Good night, Winifred," came his reply. "And thank you again." As she lay in bed that night, Winifred found her thoughts returning to the feel of Isaiah's shoulders beneath her hands, the way he had relaxed at her touch. It had been so long since she'd had any physical contact with another person, not since Thomas had last held her, months ago. The memory of Thomas Harrington brought a different kind of pain. Once, she had believed he loved her. Their forbidden romance, the wealthy family's son and the governess, had seemed like something from a novel. When he spoke of marriage, of taking her away from service, she had given herself to him completely. Then came the pregnancy, and with it, Thomas's true character revealed. His promises turned to denials, his love to contempt. He had offered money for her to take care of the problem and disappear. When she refused, he had ensured she lost her position in his family's household, denying any responsibility for her condition. Winifred placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. Despite everything, she couldn't regret the child growing within her. But she had learned a harsh lesson about trusting men's promises, yet here she was, dependent once again on a man's kindness. The difference was that Isaiah Burke had made no pretty promises, no declarations of love or devotion. He had simply offered what he could: shelter, work, respect. As sleep finally claimed her, Winifred wondered if perhaps that honest simplicity made his kindness more trustworthy than all of Thomas's flowery words had ever been. The days fell into a rhythm as November arrived. Each morning, Isaiah would rise before dawn, tend to the animals, then return for the breakfast Winifred had prepared. After eating, he would work on the addition until midday, break for lunch, then continue until darkness forced him to stop. Winifred, meanwhile, kept the cabin clean, prepared meals, mended Isaiah's work clothes, and occasionally ventured out to collect eggs from the chicken coop when the weather permitted. Her pregnancy was advancing, making some tasks more difficult, but she was determined to earn her keep. By mid-November, the addition had taken shape. The floor was laid, the frame erected, and walls were going up. Isaiah had even managed to install a small window on the east wall, explaining that morning light would be nice for the new room. "It's coming along faster than I expected," Winifred commented one evening as they sat by the fire, she with mending in her lap, he with a ledger where he kept track of his ranch accounts. "I've had motivation," Isaiah replied with a small smile, "though the weather's been in our favor too. Milder than usual for November. Will you have time to put the roof on before the next snow? Should, if I can get the Hanson's boy to help for a day or two." He set aside his ledger. "Which reminds me, I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies. Would you like to come along?" Winifred hesitated. She hadn't left the ranch since arriving almost a month ago, and the thought of facing the curious eyes of Silver Creek's residents made her nervous. "I'm not sure that's wise," she said slowly. "People will talk. People always talk," Isaiah said with a shrug. "But you can't hide out here forever. Besides, you mentioned wanting to see Doc Miller." He was right, of course. The baby had been active, but recently Winifred had experienced some cramping that concerned her. Nothing severe, but enough to make her wish for a doctor's reassurance. "All right," she agreed, "but perhaps we should be clear about my position here, that I'm your housekeeper." Isaiah nodded. "That's what you are, isn't it?" "Yes, but—" Winifred hesitated. "My condition will raise questions." "Let them question," Isaiah said firmly. "You've nothing to be ashamed of, Winifred. His defense warmed her, though she knew town gossips wouldn't be so understanding. "Thank you for that. I'll be ready in the morning." The next day dawned clear and cold. Winifred dressed in her best dress, which wasn't saying much, as she had only two with her and pinned her hair neatly. Isaiah had offered her one of his wool coats to wear over her thin shawl, and though it dwarfed her, the warmth was welcome. They set out in Isaiah's wagon, the journey to town taking about 40 minutes over the rutted dirt road. As they approached Silver Creek, Winifred's nervousness grew. The small frontier town consisted of one main street with various businesses, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a few other establishments. "We'll stop at the doctor's first," Isaiah decided, noting her anxiety. "Then the general store, should be able to head back before midday." The doctor's office was a small building next to the town's only church. Isaiah helped Winifred down from the wagon, his hand steady at her elbow. A few passers-by glanced their way, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Doc Miller's a good man," Isaiah assured her as he opened the door. "Delivered most of the children in this county." The waiting room was empty except for an older woman who looked up from her desk. "Isaiah Burke," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you in months. Not sick, I hope." "Morning, Mrs. Miller." "I'm fine, but my friend here would like to see the doctor if he's available." He gestured to Winifred. "Miss Harper is expecting." Mrs. Miller's eyes widened slightly as she took in Winifred's condition, but her smile remained professional. "Of course. The doctor just finished with his last patient. I'll let him know you're here." She disappeared through a door, returning moments later. "He can see you now, Miss Harper. Just through there." Winifred glanced at Isaiah, suddenly reluctant to leave his reassuring presence. "I'll wait right here," he promised. The examination was brief but thorough. Dr. Miller was a kindly man in his 50s who asked direct but respectful questions about her pregnancy and general health. When Winifred mentioned the cramping, he nodded thoughtfully. "Probably just the baby settling." "You're about 7 months along by my estimation." "Yes," Winifred confirmed. "Due in January." "Everything seems to be progressing normally," he assured her. "The baby's position is good, heartbeat strong. I'd like to see you again in 3 weeks and then more frequently as your time approaches." Relief washed over Winifred. "Thank you, doctor." "Now," Dr. Miller said, his tone becoming more personal as he helped her sit up, "I understand you're staying at Isaiah Burke's ranch." Winifred tensed. "Yes, I'm working as his housekeeper." The doctor nodded, his expression neutral. "Isaiah's a good man, one of the best in these parts. Known him since he arrived 5 years ago." "He's been very kind to me," Winifred said carefully. "I'm sure he has." Dr. Miller made a note in his record book. "Will you be staying on after the baby comes?" "We haven't discussed it," she admitted. "For now, the arrangement is working well for both of us." The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, you seem to be in good hands, but if you need anything at all, my wife and I are always available." Winifred thanked him and returned to the waiting room where Isaiah stood as soon as she appeared. "Everything all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes," she assured him with a genuine smile. "Everything's fine. The doctor wants to see me again in 3 weeks." Relief crossed Isaiah's features. "Good. That's good." After settling the bill, which Isaiah insisted on paying despite Winifred's protests, they headed to the general store. The large wooden building had a covered porch where several men lounged, watching their arrival with undisguised interest. "Ignore them," Isaiah murmured as he helped Winifred down from the wagon. Inside, the store was warm and well-stocked. An older man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter and broke into a smile. "Isaiah Burke. Been wondering when you'd show your face in town again." "Mr. Peterson," Isaiah greeted him with a handshake. "Been busy at the ranch." "So I've heard," Mr. Peterson replied, his eyes moving to Winifred. "And this must be the lady my wife's been hearing about." Winifred felt a flush creep into her cheeks, but Isaiah's hand at the small of her back steadied her. "This is Miss Winifred Harper," he introduced her. "She's been helping me out at the ranch. Winifred, this is Harold Peterson, owner of the finest establishment in Silver Creek." "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Peterson," Winifred said, extending her hand. The storekeeper shook it warmly. "Likewise, Miss Harper. Any friend of Isaiah's is welcome here." There was a moment of awkward silence as Mr. Peterson's gaze briefly dropped to her midsection before returning to her face. To his credit, his friendly expression never wavered. "Now, what can I get for you folks today?" he asked, moving behind the counter. Isaiah produced a list, and Mr. Peterson began gathering the items. While they were occupied, Winifred wandered the store, looking at the various goods. She paused at a display of baby items, tiny clothes, soft blankets, and a small wooden rattle. She hadn't allowed herself to think much about what she would need for the baby once it arrived. In her desperate journey west, practical concerns like shelter and food had taken precedence. Now, looking at the tiny garments, reality struck her anew. In just 2 months, she would be responsible for a helpless infant. "See something you like." Winifred turned to find a plump, gray-haired woman watching her with kind eyes. "Mrs. Peterson, I presume?" Winifred guessed. The woman smiled. "That's right, and you must be Miss Harper. Word travels fast in small towns." "So I'm learning," Winifred replied, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Mrs. Peterson's gaze followed the movement. "When are you due, dear?" "January." "Not much time to prepare," Mrs. Peterson observed. "Do you have what you'll need for the little one?" Winifred shook her head. "Not yet. I've been taking things one day at a time." Understanding filled the older woman's eyes. "Well, we can help with that. I have some things stored away from when my daughter's children were babies. They're a bit worn, but clean and serviceable." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose nonsense," Mrs. Peterson interrupted gently. "That's what neighbors are for. Besides, it would be a blessing to see them used again." Before Winifred could respond, Isaiah appeared at her side. "Mrs. Peterson," he greeted the woman with a warm smile. "I see you've met Winifred." "Indeed I have," Mrs. Peterson replied. "I was just telling her about some baby things I have that might be useful." Isaiah's eyes met Winifred's briefly. "That's generous of you. It's nothing, Mrs. Peterson waved away his thanks. "I'll have Harold bring them out to your ranch next time he makes deliveries." "We'd appreciate that," Isaiah said, surprising Winifred with the "we." As they gathered their purchases and prepared to leave, Winifred noticed several women watching her from across the street, their heads bent together in obvious gossip. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, determined not to show how much their scrutiny affected her. In the wagon heading home, Winifred finally relaxed. "That wasn't as bad as I feared," she admitted. Isaiah glanced at her with a small smile. "The Petersons are good people. The rest will come around, or they won't," Winifred said pragmatically. "But I find I mind less than I expected." Isaiah's smile widened. "That's the spirit." After a moment, he added, "Did the doctor say everything was all right with the baby?" "Yes," she assured him. "Everything's progressing normally." "Good." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you thought about names?" The question caught Winifred by surprise. She had thought about little else during the long journey west, but had kept those thoughts private. "I have a few ideas," she admitted. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her after my mother, Margaret. For a boy—" She paused. "Perhaps William, after my father." Isaiah nodded approvingly. "Good, strong names." "What about you?" Winifred asked impulsively. "If you had children, what would you name them?" A shadow crossed his face. Never gave it much thought, he said, his tone suggesting the opposite. Winifred immediately regretted the question. I'm sorry, that was too personal. No, it's all right. Isaiah kept his eyes on the road. I always liked the name Elijah for a boy, for a girl maybe Grace or Faith. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they continued toward the ranch. Winifred found herself wondering about Isaiah's life before Silver Creek, about the experiences that had shaped him into the kind, steadfast man he was. There was a depth to him, a history she glimpsed occasionally in unguarded moments. As the ranch came into view, Winifred felt an unexpected sense of homecoming. In just a month, this place had become more of a home to her than anywhere since her parents' house in Boston. Thank you for taking me to town, she said as Isaiah helped her down from the wagon. And for everything else. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. You're welcome, Winifred. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Isaiah cleared his throat and turned to unload their purchases. The moment broken but not forgotten. December arrived with a series of heavy snowstorms that confined them to the ranch for days at a time. Isaiah had managed to complete the roof on the addition before the worst weather hit, though the interior remained unfinished. Still, the progress was remarkable. A small but sturdy room now extended from the original cabin, with a doorway cut through the existing wall. We should be able to move you in there by Christmas, Isaiah announced one evening as they inspected his day's work on the interior walls. It won't be fancy, but it'll be private. Winifred ran her hand along the rough-hewn boards. It's wonderful, Isaiah. I can't believe you've done all this in such a short time, he shrugged, though she could tell he was pleased by her praise. It's what needed doing. As her pregnancy advanced, Winifred found some tasks more challenging. Isaiah had noticed her difficulty in carrying water from the pump, and without comment had begun bringing in extra buckets each morning before she woke. When she struggled to reach lower shelves, he rearranged the kitchen so frequently used items were within easy reach. These small considerations touched Winifred deeply. Thomas had never shown such thoughtfulness, even before he'd revealed his true character. Isaiah's care came without fanfare or expectation of gratitude, simply a man doing what he could to ease another's burden. One afternoon, as a particularly fierce snowstorm howled outside, Winifred sat in the rocking chair by the fire, working on a small garment she was fashioning from one of Isaiah's old flannel shirts. Mrs. Peterson had sent a bundle of baby clothes as promised, but Winifred wanted to contribute something made by her own hands. Isaiah was at the table, working on a small wooden object. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy as he carved and sanded. "What are you making?" Winifred asked, curious. He looked up, almost embarrassed. "It's nothing much, just a little cradle for the baby." Winifred's hands stilled on her sewing. "A cradle," Isaiah set down his tools and showed her the partially completed piece. It was small enough to sit beside a bed, with gently curved rockers and partially carved side panels. "I thought you might need something for the little one when it arrives," he explained. "This way, the baby can sleep near you in your room." Tears welled in Winifred's eyes before she could stop them. The thoughtfulness of the gesture that he would spend hours crafting something for her child overwhelmed her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, brushing away the tears. Isaiah looked alarmed at her emotional response. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You haven't," she assured him, smiling through her tears. "It's just, no one has been this kind to me in a very long time." His expression softened. "It's nothing more than you deserve, Winifred." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, touched something deep within her. In that moment, Sitting in the warm cabin while winter raged outside, Winifred realized with startling clarity that she was developing feelings for Isaiah Burke that went far beyond gratitude. The realization frightened her. She had trusted her heart once before, with disastrous consequences. Could she risk such vulnerability again? And even if she dared, what made her think Isaiah would welcome such feelings? He had offered her shelter and employment, not romance. "I should check on dinner," she said abruptly, setting aside her sewing and rising awkwardly from the chair. Isaiah watched her with a puzzled expression, but didn't comment on her sudden change of mood. As she busied herself at the stove, Winifred tried to rein in her wayward emotions. She had her child to think about now. Romantic notions were a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet later that night, as she lay in bed listening to Isaiah's soft breathing from the other side of the quilt partition, Winifred couldn't help wondering what it might be like to build a life here not just as his housekeeper, but as something more. The thought followed her into dreams where Isaiah held not just her, but their child, in his strong, gentle arms. Christmas approached, bringing with it a rare stretch of clear weather. Isaiah took advantage of the break in storms to finish the interior of the addition. By December 20th, the room was ready, small but snug, with the new bed Isaiah had ordered from town, a chest for Winifred's few belongings, and even a braided rug on the plank floor. "It's perfect," Winifred declared as she inspected her new quarters. At 8 months pregnant, she moved more slowly now, one hand often supporting her back. "The window could use curtains," Isaiah observed, "but I thought you might want to choose those yourself." "I can make some from that fabric Mrs. Peterson sent," Winifred suggested. The storekeeper's wife had become a regular visitor, bringing not only baby items but also materials for Winifred's use. That evening, they moved the quilt partition to the new doorway, giving Winifred complete privacy in her room while maintaining propriety. As she arranged her belongings in the chest, Winifred felt a strange mixture of emotions: gratitude for the private space, but also a curious sense of loss. She had grown accustomed to falling asleep to the sounds of Isaiah moving about the cabin, to the knowledge that he was just on the other side of the quilt. On Christmas Eve, Isaiah surprised her by bringing in a small pine tree, which he set up in a corner of the main room. "I thought we could use a bit of Christmas cheer," he explained as he secured the tree in a bucket of sand. Winifred was delighted. "It's lovely. I didn't think we'd have a tree." "Christmas was always important in my family," Isaiah said, reaching into a box he'd brought in. "I have a few ornaments my mother saved. Not many, but enough to make it festive." Together, they decorated the small tree with the treasured ornaments: delicate glass balls, a few carved wooden figures, and a star fashioned from tin for the top. Winifred contributed ribbons she had saved from Mrs. Peterson's packages, tying them into bows among the branches. When they finished, Isaiah lit a candle and placed it carefully near the tree, the light reflecting off the ornaments and casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. "It's beautiful," Winifred murmured, standing back to admire their work. "Thank you for this, Isaiah." He looked down at her, his expression soft in the candlelight. "Merry Christmas, Winifred." "Merry Christmas," she replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from his body. For a moment, it seemed as if he might say something more, might even reach for her. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back. "I have something for you," he said, moving to retrieve a package wrapped in brown paper from beneath his bed. "For tomorrow, but—" "Well, I thought you might like to have it tonight." Winifred accepted the package, surprised by its weight. "Isaiah, you shouldn't have just opened it," he encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a beautiful wooden box with a hinged lid. The surface was polished to a high shine, with delicate carved flowers decorating the top and sides. "Oh," she breathed, running her fingers over the intricate design. "Open it," Isaiah prompted. Inside, the box was lined with soft fabric, divided into compartments of various sizes. A jewelry box, she realized. "I noticed you don't have a proper place for your things," Isaiah explained. "And I thought when the baby comes you might want somewhere special to keep mementos." Winifred looked up at him, her eyes shining. "It's beautiful. Did you make this?" He nodded, looking almost shy. "In the evenings while you were sewing, do you like it?" "I love it," she said with complete honesty. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Isaiah's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made Winifred's heart flutter. "I'm glad." "I have something for you too," she admitted, "though it's not nearly as grand." She went to her room and returned with a small package wrapped in a scrap of fabric. "It isn't much," she warned as she handed it to him. Isaiah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Winifred, this is wonderful. I used some of the yarn Mrs. Peterson brought," she explained. "I noticed your old one was nearly worn through." He immediately wrapped it around his neck, appreciating the length and softness. "It's perfect, thank you." Their eyes met over the small gifts, and Winifred felt that same connection she'd experienced before, a wordless understanding, a shared appreciation that went beyond mere friendship. The moment was broken by a sharp kick from the baby that made Winifred gasp and place a hand on her belly. Isaiah was immediately concerned. "Are you all right?" she laughed softly. "Yes, just an enthusiastic kick. Here." Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. "Feel." Isaiah's eyes widened as the baby kicked again, the movement clearly felt beneath his palm. "That's something," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Winifred suddenly realized the intimacy of what she'd done, placing his hand on her body, and began to pull away. But Isaiah kept his hand there a moment longer, a smile spreading across his face as the baby kicked once more. "Strong little one," he commented, finally withdrawing his hand. "Takes after his mother, I'd say." The compliment warmed Winifred. "Or her mother," she corrected with a smile. "We don't know yet." "Either way," Isaiah said softly, "that child is lucky to have you." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, brought tears to Winifred's eyes. No one had ever suggested that her child was lucky, only unfortunate to be born to an unwed mother, a shameful secret to be hidden away. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. Isaiah looked as if he wanted to say more, but instead he simply nodded. "It's getting late. We should probably turn in." "Yes," Winifred agreed, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. "Good night, Isaiah, and thank you again for the beautiful gift." "Good night, Winifred. Sleep well." In her new room, Winifred placed the wooden box on the chest beside her bed, admiring the craftsmanship in the soft glow of her lamp. The care Isaiah had taken with it, the hours of work evident in every detail, spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. As she prepared for bed, Winifred allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this were truly her home, if Isaiah were truly her family. The fantasy was both sweet and painful, sweet in its simplicity, painful in its impossibility. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Winifred couldn't help but hope that perhaps, someday, fantasy might become reality. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, sunlight glinting off the snow that blanketed the ranch. Winifred woke to the smells of coffee and frying bacon, Isaiah apparently already up and preparing breakfast. When she emerged from her room, she found him at the stove, dressed in his best shirt, his hair still damp from washing. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Sleep well." "Merry Christmas," she returned. "Yes, thank you. The new room is very comfortable." "Good." He gestured to the table already set for breakfast. I thought I'd give you a morning off from cooking." Winifred sat down, touched by the gesture. "This is lovely." They ate together, the mood festive despite the simplicity of their celebration. After breakfast, Isaiah insisted Winifred rest while he cleaned up. "I have plans for today," he announced as he dried the last plate. "Plans?" Winifred asked, curious. "The Petersons invited us for Christmas dinner," he explained. "Mrs. Peterson was quite insistent that we come." Winifred hesitated. While she had seen Mrs. Peterson several times since their first meeting in town, the thought of a formal social gathering made her nervous. "Are you sure that's wise? People will talk." "People already talk," Isaiah pointed out, "and I can't think of a better way to show them there's nothing shameful about our arrangement than to appear together publicly." His defense warmed her, though she remained uncertain. "What if they're unkind?" "Then we'll leave," Isaiah said simply. "But I think you'll find the Petersons have already done much to shape opinion in your favor. Mrs. Peterson is something of a force in Silver Creek." Winifred had to smile at that accurate description. "All right if you're sure." "I am." Isaiah checked the clock on the mantel. "We should leave in about an hour, if that gives you enough time to get ready." Winifred nodded and retreated to her room to change into her best dress, the blue one she had been saving for special occasions. It was growing tight across her abdomen, but still presentable with a few adjustments. When she emerged, Isaiah was waiting, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his beard neatly trimmed. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes appreciative. Winifred felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." The drive to town was pleasant, the day cold but sunny. Isaiah had filled the wagon bed with hay and placed heated bricks wrapped in fabric beneath the seat to keep them warm. He'd also brought along a small parcel containing gifts for the Petersons, a carved wooden box similar to Winifred's for Mrs. Peterson, and a new pipe for Mr. Peterson. "You think they'll like them?" Winifred asked, suddenly nervous about meeting the couple in their home. "They'll love them," Isaiah assured her, "especially coming from both of us." The both of us sent a little thrill through Winifred. More and more, Isaiah spoke of them as a unit, a partnership, though he had never suggested anything beyond their current arrangement. The Petersons lived above their store in a spacious apartment that was warm and inviting. Mrs. Peterson greeted them at the door, her round face beaming. "Isaiah, Miss Harper, Merry Christmas." She embraced Isaiah and, to Winifred's surprise, her as well. Come in. Harold, they're here." Mr. Peterson appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Merry Christmas. Welcome to our home." The apartment was festively decorated, with a large tree in the corner and greenery draped over the mantelpiece. The table was already set for dinner, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. "You're our only guests this year," Mrs. Peterson explained as she took their coats. "Our daughter and her family couldn't make the journey from Cheyenne with the snow." "We're honored to be included," Winifred said sincerely. The afternoon passed pleasantly. The Petersons were gracious hosts, making no mention of Winifred's condition except when Mrs. Peterson quietly asked if she was comfortable and needed anything. The dinner was excellent: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and a variety of vegetables, followed by a rich plum pudding throughout the meal. Winifred couldn't help but notice how Isaiah kept a watchful eye on her, making sure her plate was filled and her glass never empty. His attentiveness was not lost on Mrs. Peterson, who watched them with knowing eyes. After dinner, they exchanged gifts. The Petersons were delighted with their presents, and in return gave Isaiah a fine new leather belt and Winifred a beautiful shawl knitted by Mrs. Peterson herself. "This is too generous," Winifred protested as she wrapped the soft wool around her shoulders. "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "Every woman should have something pretty, especially at Christmas." As the afternoon waned, Mr. Peterson suggested Isaiah join him for a cigar in his study. When the men had gone, Mrs. Peterson moved to sit beside Winifred on the sofa. "Now," she said with a warm smile, "we can talk freely. How are you really doing, my dear?" Winifred found herself opening up to the older woman, describing her new room, the cradle Isaiah was making for the baby, and the daily routine they had established. "He's been very kind," she concluded. "I don't know what would have happened to me if he hadn't found me that night." Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "Isaiah Burke is one of the finest men I know, and unless I'm very much mistaken, his feelings for you go beyond mere kindness." Winifred's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, I don't think, my dear," Mrs. Peterson interrupted gently. "I've known Isaiah for 5 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Winifred didn't know how to respond. Could it be true? Had Isaiah developed feelings for her as she had for him? "I wouldn't presume," she said finally. Mrs. Peterson's eyes were kind but knowing. "There's no presumption in acknowledging what's plain to see. The question is, do you return his feelings?" The directness of the question took Winifred by surprise. It's complicated. My situation, your situation is what it is," Mrs. Peterson said pragmatically. "It doesn't change what's in your heart." Winifred looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. "After what happened with the baby's father, I'm not sure I can trust my judgment." "We all make mistakes, child," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "The important thing is learning from them. And from what I can see, Isaiah Burke is nothing like the man who abandoned you." Before Winifred could respond, the men returned, bringing with them the scent of cigar smoke and a change in conversation. But Mrs. Peterson's words stayed with Winifred throughout the remainder of the visit. On the drive home, with the sun setting behind the mountains and the air growing colder, Winifred found herself studying Isaiah's profile in the fading light. His strong jaw, the straight nose, the kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She had come to know every feature of his face, to find comfort in his steady presence. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaiah said, catching her gaze. Winifred smiled. "I was just thinking what a lovely day it's been. Thank you for insisting we go. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "The Petersons think highly of you, you know." "They're very kind," Winifred replied. "Mrs. Peterson especially has been so welcoming." Isaiah nodded. "She's taken quite a shine to you. Told me I was lucky to have found such a capable and charming housekeeper." There was something in his tone that made Winifred look at him more closely. "Is that all?" she said. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. She might have hinted at a few other things. "Such as?" Isaiah's eyes met hers briefly before returning to the road. "Such as the fact that I'd be a fool not to recognize what was right in front of me." Winifred's heart raced. "And what did you say to that?" "I said Mrs. Peterson was a wise woman who rarely missed anything important." He glanced at her again, his expression now serious. "And that I was well aware of my good fortune." The words hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Winifred wanted to ask more, to clarify exactly what he meant, but something held her back, fear, perhaps, or the lingering uncertainty of her position. Instead, she simply said, "I'm the fortunate one, Isaiah." He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but he didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't pull away. As they approached the ranch, the familiar outline of the cabin against the darkening sky filled Winifred with a sense of homecoming. In just 2 months, this place had become more of a home than anywhere else had been since her parents died. And the man beside her had become more important to her than she had ever thought possible. New Year's Eve arrived with another snowstorm, this one fiercer than any before. The wind howled around the cabin, finding every crack and crevice while snow piled against the windows. Isaiah had spent the morning securing the animals and bringing in extra firewood, his concern evident as he checked and rechecked their supplies. "We should be fine," he announced after counting the remaining food stores, "even if we're snowed in for a week." Winifred, now uncomfortable most of the time as her pregnancy neared its end, sat in the rocking chair by the fire. "Is that likely? It's happened before," Isaiah admitted. "Last winter, a storm like this kept me cabin-bound for 9 days. The thought of being confined together for so long might once have made Winifred nervous. Now, it felt almost like a gift uninterrupted time with Isaiah before the baby's arrival changed everything. Since Christmas, something had shifted between them. Nothing had been declared openly, but there was a new awareness, a tenderness in their interactions that hadn't been there before. Isaiah's hand would linger when he helped her from a chair. Winifred would find reasons to touch his arm or shoulder in passing. "How are you feeling?" Isaiah asked, coming to sit in the chair opposite her. "Enormous," Winifred replied with a rueful smile, rubbing her lower back. "And tired, doctor." "Miller says it could be any time now, though he still thinks early January is most likely." Isaiah's expression was a mixture of concern and something else, anticipation, perhaps. "Everything's ready. The cradle's finished. We have clothes and blankets thanks to Mrs. Peterson, and I've arranged for Doc Miller to come out as soon as we send word." Winifred nodded, touched by his thoroughness. "Thank you, Isaiah, for everything." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "No need for thanks." "There is," she insisted. "Not everyone would do what you've done for a stranger." "You're hardly a stranger anymore, Winifred," he said softly. Their eyes met, and Winifred felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. More and more, she found herself wondering what it would be like if Isaiah were to kiss her, to hold her in his arms not out of necessity but desire. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, making Winifred wince. Isaiah's brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she assured him. "Just an active little one." She guided his hand to her belly, a gesture that had become natural between them. Isaiah's large palm spread across the swell, his expression softening as he felt the movement beneath. "I can't wait to meet this child," he said, surprising her. "To see who they'll become." The simple statement, delivered with such genuine anticipation, brought tears to Winifred's eyes. Thomas had never once expressed interest in their child, seeing it only as an inconvenience, a complication to be dealt with. "Isaiah," she began, not sure what she wanted to say but feeling the need to speak. Before she could continue, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing Isaiah's attention. He rose to check that everything was secure, the moment lost. The storm continued throughout the day and into the night. As darkness fell, Isaiah built up the fire and lit several lamps, creating a warm glow that kept the howling darkness at bay. "Quite a way to end the year," he commented as they sat down to dinner. "Indeed," Winifred agreed. "Though I can't say I'll be sorry to see 1876 go. It hasn't been my finest year." Isaiah considered this. "Parts of it have been difficult, certainly, but not all bad, surely." Winifred thought of the child she would soon hold in her arms, of the man sitting across from her who had changed her life with his kindness. "No, not all bad," she conceded with a small smile. "The last few months have been unexpectedly good." "For me as well," Isaiah said, his eyes holding hers. "Better than I could have imagined." The honesty in his voice made Winifred's breath catch. "Isaiah," a loud crash interrupted her, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Isaiah was on his feet immediately, moving toward the source of the noise, the window in Winifred's room. "Stay here," he instructed, taking a lamp with him. Winifred waited anxiously, hearing him move around in her room. After a few minutes, he emerged, his expression grim. "The storm blew a branch through your window," he reported. "I've boarded it up temporarily, but it's too cold in there for you to sleep tonight." "Oh," Winifred said, dismayed. "Perhaps I could sleep here by the fire." Isaiah shook his head firmly. "You'll take my bed, I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't put you out of your bed again," she protested. "You're not putting me out of anything," he insisted. "I'm offering. Besides, it's only for tonight. I'll fix the window properly tomorrow." Winifred knew that tone by now. Isaiah had made up his mind, and there would be no changing it. "Very well," she conceded. "Thank you." As the evening wore on, they sat companionably by the fire, Isaiah reading aloud from one of his books while Winifred worked on a small blanket for the baby. Outside, the storm continued unabated, but inside the cabin was warm and secure. "It's nearly midnight," Isaiah observed, checking his pocket watch. "Almost the new year." Winifred set aside her sewing. "So it is." Isaiah rose and moved to the kitchen area, returning with 2 cups. "I know you can't have whiskey in your condition, but I thought we might toast with cider." He handed her a cup of the warm, spiced drink, then raised his own. "To 1877, he said. "May it bring health, happiness, and all good things." "To 1877, Winifred echoed, touching her cup to his. As they drank, their eyes met over the rims of their cups. Something in Isaiah's gaze made Winifred's heart race, a heat that had nothing to do with the fire or the spiced cider. "Winifred," he began, setting down his cup, "there's something I've been wanting to say to you." She set her own cup aside, her hands suddenly trembling. "Yes." Isaiah moved closer, taking her hands in his. "These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. I never knew how empty this place was until you filled it with your presence." Winifred's breath caught in her throat. "Isaiah, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know your circumstances are complicated. I know you came here out of necessity, not choice, but I need you to know that He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I've come to care for you, Winifred, more than I thought possible." Joy bloomed in Winifred's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "I care for you too, Isaiah, so much." His eyes searched hers, hope and uncertainty mingled in their depths. "Even with everything you've been through, even with the baby coming, especially with the baby coming," she said softly. "You've shown me what a real man is, Isaiah Burke. Kind, honorable, steady, everything Thomas wasn't." Isaiah's jaw tightened at the mention of the man who had abandoned her. "I would never treat you that way. Never." "I know," Winifred said simply. "That's why I trust you, She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Why I've fallen in love with you." The words hung between them, momentous and irreversible. For a heartbeat, Winifred feared she had misread everything, had spoken too soon. Then Isaiah's face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that it took her breath away. "I love you too, Winifred Harper. I think I have since the moment I found you in my haystack." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Winifred had no desire to retreat. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips touching his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening as they both gave in to feelings long held in check. When they finally parted, Winifred felt dizzy with happiness. Isaiah rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. "I never thought I'd find this," he murmured. "Not out here, not after everything, nor I," Winifred admitted. "Especially not after Thomas." Isaiah pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "I love you for who you are, Winifred. And I already love this child, not because it's mine by blood, but because it's yours. If you'll have me, I want to be a father to your baby, to raise it as my own." Tears filled Winifred's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "Oh, Isaiah, nothing would make me happier." He brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "Then there's only one thing left to ask," he said, taking her hands in his once more. "Winifred Harper, will you marry me? Not just for the baby's sake, but because I love you and want to spend my life with you." "Yes," Winifred whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Yes, Isaiah Burke, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he leaned in to kiss her again, sealing their promise as the clock struck midnight and a new year began. They spent the next hour talking, planning, sharing hopes and dreams for their future together. Isaiah wanted to marry as soon as possible, before the baby came if the weather permitted. Winifred, though equally eager, was more practical. "The storm may keep us here for days," she reminded him. "And my time is approaching. We may have to wait until after the birth." "I don't care when it happens," Isaiah assured her, "as long as it does. I just want to make you my wife, to give your child my name." The tenderness in his voice brought fresh tears to Winifred's eyes. "You are a good man, Isaiah Burke. And you," he said, touching her cheek gently, "are the best thing that's ever happened to me." When Winifred finally retired to Isaiah's bed, it was with his kiss still warm on her lips and joy filling her heart. As she drifted toward sleep, one hand resting on her swollen belly, she marveled at the strange path that had led her here, from desperation to happiness, from abandonment to love. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, but within the cabin, all was warmth and contentment. Isaiah fixed Winifred's window as promised, then spent the afternoon making plans for expanding the cabin further. "We'll need more room now," he explained as he sketched on a piece of paper. "Another bedroom eventually, and perhaps a proper kitchen area." Winifred watched him with a smile, charmed by his enthusiasm. "Are you planning to build an entire house, Isaiah?" He looked up, his eyes warm. "Eventually, yes. A home worthy of you and our family. Our family." The words filled Winifred with a happiness she had never expected to find again. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Winifred felt the first twinge, a tightening across her abdomen that was different from the usual discomfort. She didn't mention it, not wanting to cause alarm over what might be nothing. But as the evening progressed, the sensation returned, stronger and more rhythmic. When a particularly intense contraction made her gasp, Isaiah was immediately alert. "What is it?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I think," Winifred said carefully, "that the baby might be coming." Isaiah's eyes widened. "Now, are you sure?" Another contraction answered that question, making Winifred grimace and nod. "Yes, I'm quite sure." Isaiah was on his feet in an instant. "I'll go for the doctor." "No," Winifred caught his arm. "The storm, it's too dangerous. And first babies often take time. These are early pains, Isaiah. They could go on for hours." He looked torn, clearly wanting to fetch help but reluctant to leave her. "What do we do then?" "For now we wait," Winifred said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "And we prepare." The next few hours passed in a blur of increasing discomfort. Isaiah moved with quiet efficiency, heating water, preparing the bed with clean linens, gathering the supplies Mrs. Peterson had advised them to have ready. Through it all, he remained at Winifred's side, supporting her through each contraction, his steady presence a comfort in the face of her growing pain. "I wish the doctor were here," he said as midnight approached and Winifred's labor intensified. "As do I," she admitted between pains. "But you're doing wonderfully, Isaiah." He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "Neither do I," Winifred confessed. "But we'll figure it out together." As the night wore on, the contractions came faster and stronger. Winifred moved from the chair to the bed, finding it harder to remain composed as the pain increased. Isaiah never left her side, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, offering water and murmuring encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as she gripped his hand through a particularly intense contraction. "You can do this, Winifred. I'm right here with you." By dawn, Winifred knew the time was near. The urge to push had become overwhelming, her body taking over in a process as old as humanity itself. "Isaiah," she gasped, "the baby's coming now." Though fear flashed briefly in his eyes, Isaiah nodded resolutely. "Tell me what to do." What followed was the most difficult and miraculous experience of Winifred's life. With Isaiah's support, both physical and emotional, she brought their child into the world as the first light of the new year painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold. The baby's cry, strong and indignant, filled the cabin. Isaiah, his hands steady despite his obvious emotion, helped clean the tiny form and wrap it in a soft blanket. "It's a girl," he announced, his voice thick with awe as he placed the newborn in Winifred's waiting arms. A beautiful, perfect little girl. Exhausted but elated, Winifred gazed down at her daughter's face, the delicate features, the wisp of dark hair, the tiny hands clenched into fists. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Isaiah sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Winifred, the other hand gently touching the baby's cheek. "She's amazing," he murmured, "just like her mother." Winifred looked up at him, her heart so full of love she thought it might overflow. "Margaret," she said softly. "Margaret Faith Burke. After my mother and with your favorite name." Isaiah's eyes widened. "Burke, you want to give her my name, of course," Winifred said simply. "She's your daughter now in every way that matters." Tears filled Isaiah's eyes as he leaned down to kiss first Winifred, then the baby's forehead. "My daughter," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "My family." The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. But within the cabin, the warmth of new life and newfound love created a sanctuary against the winter's chill. 3 days later, when the roads were finally passable, Doc Miller made his way to the ranch, arriving to find mother and baby doing remarkably well. He examined them both, pronouncing Margaret a fine, healthy girl, and commending Isaiah and Winifred on their handling of the birth. "Not many men would have kept their wits about them the way you did, Isaiah," the doctor observed as they stood outside the bedroom where Winifred was resting. Isaiah shrugged modestly. "I just did what needed doing." "Well, you did it well." The doctor glanced back at the bedroom door. "Miss Harper is a fortunate woman to have found you." "I'm the fortunate one," Isaiah corrected. Then, with a small smile, he added, "And soon she'll be Mrs. Burke, not Miss Harper." The doctor's eyebrows rose, though his expression was pleased rather than surprised. "Is that so?" "Congratulations are in order, then." "Thank you," Isaiah said. "We're hoping to have the ceremony as soon as Winifred's strong enough to travel to town." "Give it another week," Doc Miller advised. "She needs time to recover." Isaiah nodded his agreement. "Of course. The baby's welfare comes first." "And what about the child's father?" the doctor asked carefully. "Any chance he might cause trouble?" Isaiah's expression hardened. "Thomas Harrington made his position clear when he abandoned Winifred. He wanted nothing to do with either of them. And that suits me fine, because Margaret is my daughter now in every way that matters." The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Good. The child deserves a father who wants her." He picked up his bag. "I'll stop by again in a few days to check on them both. Send for me sooner if there's any problem." After the doctor left, Isaiah returned to the bedroom where Winifred was nursing Margaret. The sight of them together, Winifred's face, soft with love as she gazed down at the nursing infant, filled him with a contentment he had never known before. "Doc says you're both doing well," he reported, sitting gently on the edge of the bed. Says we should wait another week before the wedding to give you time to regain your strength. Winifred looked up with a smile. A week sounds perfect. I'd like to be able to stand for more than a few minutes at a time on my wedding day. Isaiah chuckled, reaching out to stroke Margaret's dark hair. I'd carry you the whole time if needed. I know you would, Winifred said softly. Her expression grew more serious. Isaiah, are you certain about this, about us? I would understand if you've had second thoughts. Isaiah took her free hand, his gaze steady and sure. Winifred Harper, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love Margaret. I want nothing more than to make you both my family, legally and permanently. The doubt in her eyes faded, replaced by a happiness that took his breath away. Then a week it is, she said, though it feels like the longest wait imaginable. Worth every minute, Isaiah assured her, leaning forward to kiss her gently. We have our whole lives ahead of us. The following week passed in a blur of adjustments as they settled into life with a newborn. Margaret proved to be a good-natured baby, crying only when hungry or uncomfortable, and sleeping for blessed stretches between feedings. Isaiah moved his things back into the main cabin, giving Winifred and the baby complete privacy in her room. The arrangement was temporary, he assured her after the wedding. They would share his larger bed in the main cabin, with the cradle nearby for Margaret. Mrs. Peterson visited twice, bringing gifts for the baby and wedding preparations for Winifred, including a beautiful cream-colored dress that she had altered to fit Winifred's post-pregnancy figure. You'll make a lovely bride, she declared as Winifred tried on the dress. Isaiah won't know what hit him. Winifred blushed at the compliment, still somewhat amazed that this was truly happening, that in just a few days she would become Mrs. Isaiah Burke. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the January sun glinting off the snow that still blanketed the landscape. Isaiah had gone to town the previous day to make arrangements with the minister and to spend the night at the Petersons, observing the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Mrs. Peterson arrived early to help Winifred prepare, cooing over Margaret while Winifred bathed and dressed. The cream-colored dress fit perfectly, and Mrs. Peterson arranged Winifred's hair with fresh evergreen sprigs and a few dried flowers she had preserved from her garden. There, she said, stepping back to admire her work. You look beautiful, my dear. Winifred gazed at her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the desperate, frightened woman who had hidden in a haystack just 3 months ago. In her place was a bride, her eyes bright with happiness, her future full of promise. Thank you, she said, turning to embrace the older woman, for everything. It's been my pleasure, Mrs. Peterson assured her. Now let's get this little one ready. Can't have the flower of the day looking anything less than perfect. Margaret, now 8 days old, was dressed in a beautiful white gown that Mrs. Peterson had made specially for the occasion. A tiny bonnet protected her head from the winter chill. Isaiah sent the wagon with young Hanson to drive you, Mrs. Peterson informed her as they finished the preparations. He's waiting outside whenever you're ready. Winifred took a deep breath, gathering her courage. This was at the beginning of her new life, her real life, with the man she loved. I'm ready, she said, picking up Margaret carefully. The small church in Silver Creek was filled with more people than Winifred had expected. It seemed half the town had turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the cowboy's marriage to the woman he had found in his haystack. But as Winifred walked down the aisle, Margaret in her arms, she saw only Isaiah waiting for her at the altar. His face, alight with love and pride, was the only thing that mattered. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other and the child they now claimed as their own. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to Winifred's eyes. "Mrs. Burke," he whispered against her lips. "Mr. Burke," she returned, her smile radiant. The reception at the Petersons' home was a joyful affair, with food, music, and more well-wishers than Winifred could have imagined. Many of the townspeople who had initially been suspicious of her now came forward with congratulations and gifts for the baby. "Seems you've won them over," Isaiah observed as they received yet another present, this one from the blacksmith and his wife. "We have," Winifred corrected, squeezing his hand. "Together." By late afternoon, with Margaret growing fussy and Winifred feeling the fatigue of the day, Isaiah announced it was time for them to return home. Amid good-natured teasing and heartfelt well-wishes, they made their farewells and climbed into the wagon Isaiah had prepared for their journey. As they drove away from town, Winifred leaned against her husband's shoulder, Margaret sleeping peacefully in her arms. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, certainly, but full of love and possibility. "Happy, Mrs. Burke?" Isaiah asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Winifred replied honestly. "And you?" Isaiah's smile was answer enough, but he put it into words nonetheless. "I have everything I could ever want right here beside me." The ranch came into view as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Isaiah had hung a wreath of evergreen on the door in celebration, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. He had asked young Hanson to go ahead and light the fire so the cabin would be warm upon their return. As Isaiah lifted her down from the wagon, Winifred felt a sense of homecoming so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. This was where she belonged with this man, with their child in this home they would build together. Isaiah took Margaret from her arms, then surprised Winifred by sweeping her up as well, carrying them both across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Burke," he said, setting her gently on her feet once inside. Winifred looked around the cabin that had become so dear to her in such a short time. The fire crackled in the hearth, the cradle Isaiah had made stood ready beside their bed, and the future she had once feared now seemed bright with promise. "Home," she echoed, turning to look up at her husband. "I never thought I'd find one again." Isaiah shifted Margaret to one arm so he could pull Winifred close with the other. "You'll never have to look again," he promised. "You belong here, both of you." As Winifred stood in the circle of his embrace, their daughter nestled between them, she knew with absolute certainty that Isaiah spoke the truth. After months of fear and uncertainty, of feeling lost and alone, she had found not just shelter, but love. Not just a place to stay, but a place to belong. And it had all begun on a cold October night, when a lonely cowboy had lifted a desperate woman from a haystack and into his arms and, ultimately, into his heart. 10 years later, epilogue. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the Burke farmhouse as Winifred put the finishing touches on the birthday cake. 10 candles stood ready to be lit for Margaret's special day, arranged in a circle atop the chocolate frosting that was her favorite. "Mama!" 6-year-old William burst through the kitchen door, his dark hair tousled and cheeks flushed with excitement. "Papa says to tell you the guests are starting to arrive." Winifred smiled at her son, so like his father in both appearance and manner. "Thank you, darling. Tell Papa I'll be right out." As William dashed back outside, 4-year-old Grace toddled in from the parlor where she had been playing with her dolls. "Cake ready, Mama?" she asked, her blue eyes so like Winifred's own wide with anticipation. "Almost, sweetheart." Winifred lifted her youngest onto her hip, pressing a kiss to her soft cheek. "Shall we go welcome our guests?" The Burke ranch had grown substantially in the decades since Winifred and Isaiah had married. The modest cabin had been expanded into a proper farmhouse with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a comfortable parlor. The land now boasted 100 head of cattle, several horses, and fields of hay and vegetables. Isaiah had even built a small schoolhouse on their property, where Winifred taught not only their own children, but also those of neighboring farms. Outside, the yard had been transformed for Margaret's birthday celebration. Tables were set up beneath the large oak trees, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. A swing hung from one sturdy branch, and the small barn had been cleared for dancing later. Isaiah stood by the gate, greeting the Petersons, who despite their advancing years remained dear friends. He caught sight of Winifred and Grace emerging from the house and smiled that same warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "There they are," he called, extending an arm to welcome them into the circle. Mrs. Peterson embraced Winifred warmly. "My dear, everything looks wonderful. Margaret must be thrilled." "She helped plan most of it," Winifred admitted with a laugh. "She has very specific ideas about birthday celebrations." "Much like her mother," Isaiah teased, taking Grace from Winifred's arms. The little girl immediately nestled against her father's shoulder, her favorite perch. More guests arrived: the Hansons with their 3 boys, Doc Miller and his wife, the new schoolteacher from town and his family, and various other neighbors and friends. The children immediately formed a pack, running off to play under the watchful eye of 14-year-old Jacob Hanson. Margaret presided over it all with the quiet confidence that had marked her character from an early age. Though she had Isaiah's dark hair and tall frame, her features were distinctly Winifred's. She had inherited her mother's intelligence and love of books, but also possessed a natural affinity for ranching that delighted Isaiah. "Mama," she said, appearing at Winifred's side as the cake was being brought out, "is it true that you were going to name me Margaret Faith even before you met Papa?" Winifred exchanged a glance with Isaiah, who had come to stand beside them. "I had thought of Margaret," she admitted. "After my mother, but Faith was your father's choice." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "And you found each other just in time for me to be born." "Just in time," Isaiah agreed, wrapping an arm around Winifred's waist. "Though your mother likes to say I found her in a haystack." Margaret giggled, familiar with the story that had become family legend. "I'm glad you did, Papa." "So am I, sweetheart," Isaiah said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every single day." As the children gathered around to sing "Happy Birthday," Winifred leaned against her husband's solid strength, overwhelmed for a moment by the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate night in the haystack to this joyful celebration, every step had been worth taking, every challenge overcome, every joy shared, every dream realized together. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Burke," Isaiah murmured in her ear. Winifred turned to look up at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are," she said softly. "How blessed." Isaiah's eyes, still as kind and steady as they had been on that first night, held hers with understanding. "The best decision I ever made was checking that barn when I heard a noise. And the best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to stay," Winifred replied. As Margaret blew out her candles to the cheers of family and friends, Winifred sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the life she had found, not the one she had planned, but infinitely more precious for being unexpected. A life built on the foundation of that first act of kindness, when a lonely cowboy had lifted a desperate woman from a haystack and into his arms, neither of them knowing they had just found everything they would ever need.